Welcome to The Landscape, your show about America's parks and public lands. I'm Aaron Weiss at the Center for Western Priorities in beautiful Denver, Colorado.
And I'm Kate Gretzinger in Salt Lake City. On today's episode, we're talking to Jayson O'Neill, founder of Save Our Parks, about the massive grift Donald Trump and Doug Burgum are running through the National Park Service to funnel money to the president's vanity projects in D.C., like the now green reflecting pool that you may have heard about, as well as the shady Freedom 250 organization that Trump is using to co-opt America's upcoming birthday party to celebrate himself. But before we get to that, the news.
Well, as Kate just mentioned, the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool, a National Park Service site, of course, is once again filled with algae, despite Interior Secretary Doug Burgum's big $14 million renovation. Burgum said the project included the installation of something called nanobubbles, in addition to painting the bottom of the pool a color he called American flag blue. It turns out the nanobubbles aren't bubbling much of all, and the American flag blue is now, of course, just algae green, just a few days after the renovation was finished. It prompted one visitor to compare it to the Chicago River on St. Patrick's Day, when the city dyes it green.
It's really incredible. You just can't make this up. And Aaron, did you see that they're actually pouring hydrogen peroxide into the pool?
I mean, this might work to kill the algae, but at some point you have to worry about like the splash hazard to kids around. This does not seem like a long-term solution if you have to keep dumping chemicals in the darn thing. We knew it was not going to be a successful solution the whole time because the pipes going in and out of the pool have been leaking for years, and the only way any of this is actually going to get fixed is to fix those leaky pipes. They did not do that because Trump somehow thought he could have this thing fixed in time for July 4th. It's not going to happen, folks.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned it, but $14 million and it seems like maybe they just got scammed by this contractor.
It certainly seems that way. I guess we'll find out what happens when Doug Burgum calls him up and asks for a refund. Some other news while we're here. The clock on Senator Mike Lee's effort to undo protections for Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument ran out last week. The Senate had a 60 legislative day window to take a simple majority vote to undo that plan, which was developed and implemented under President Biden. The effort, which was led by Mike Lee and Utah Representative Celeste Malloy, would have used the Congressional Review Act to reverse a management plan that took years of collaboration among tribes, state and local governments, other stakeholders, as well as the public overall. Critically, if it had passed, the CRA would have barred BLM from ever issuing a substantially similar management plan, which, as we've talked about, is the problem with the CRA. It's a blunt instrument. It would have left the national monument in regulatory limbo. So this is a big victory for public lands. It is also a victory for just sane management and Congress recognizing, hang on, this is not the right tool. And it underscores just how toxic Mike Lee is in the Senate. He only needed 30 votes to get a discharge petition on the CRA resolution. It certainly appears at this point he couldn't even muster that. That, folks, is an actual win.
Our guest today is Jayson O'Neill, a longtime public lands watchdog and Montanan who previously led the Western Values Project and now heads up Save Our Parks, a campaign working to fight against the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle the National Park Service. Jayson, welcome to The Landscape.
Well, thanks, guys, for having me. I'm an avid listener and excited to get into it today.
Awesome. Well, let's start with some of the big news. The New York Times reported that at least $67 million in national park entrance fee funding is being spent on DC fountains and the reflecting pool and various other vanity projects by Trump in the Capitol. And the Washington Post actually put the total diversion closer to $90 million. When someone pays entrance fees at Yellowstone, for example, where does that money normally go and what has changed? How is it going to DC projects now, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, so as folks might not know, you go to your park, your favorite park, your recreation spot where you have to maybe pay a fee, and majority of those fees go to maintain that park or that outdoor spot that you like to visit. But under federal law, the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act, Congress has set forth that and it's important in sort of how we sort of read the law and what Congress intended, that not less than 80% of those recreation entrance fees and site-specific agency passes go right back into the actual park you visit. But that also means, as we know from some of the numbers we've looked at with our beloved parks and the tourists that visit them, right? That's a big pot of money. So when you talk about 20% of those entrance fees, that, as we've seen under the Burgum reign, is that gives them a lot of discretion. And what we're seeing is that money is being directly pushed and funneled into these DC vanity projects. And also what we sort of found out again today, as we sort of continue to uncover it, was the Washington Post reported is that they're actually usurping and using all the fees when you buy your annual pass online, which again I would say to everybody in America, again, as a parks advocate and somebody that loves our parks, it's still a great deal out there to get your pass, and entrance fees are very affordable and egalitarian is right now for us to enter and use our parks. But now we have big concerns about where this money is going and how it's going to last and how it's going to look in the future.
So it seems like there are kind of two questions here. Number one, is this legal? And it looks like it maybe broadly is, because Congress never thought to say, well, you can't spend all this cash on vanity projects. But then there's the separate question around, is it proper, and the amount that they're spending. So Lafayette Park is right across the street from the White House. Back in 2022, the Park Service said it would cost a little over $3 million to restore and get those two fountains in that park working again. But now Doug Burgum is spending more than $17 million just to fix those two fountains. At the reflecting pool on the mall between Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial, that work came in at over $13 million, which is more than 7 times what President Trump said the work would cost. Is there any justification for suddenly inflating these price tags like that?
Well, I think it's important too to put that in context, right, Aaron? And it's, what we've seen is sort of the frivolous spending. Fraud, waste, and abuse is a term that's kind of flying around quite a bit under this administration. But, for listeners to put that in context, right? All right now, as we sit here and talk about this, the parks alone backlog is over $24 billion. If we incorporate all our public lands and our recreation sites, that number jumps to nearly $35.5 billion, which includes places for BLM and U.S. and Fish and Wildlife areas. As we just put out last week, right? I mean, that's sort of, again, as we look at Western states where primarily this backlog exists, that's $17 billion across our Western states and over $9 billion for our parks. So when we talk about these cost overruns and the insane cost overruns, quite frankly, in which we were promised and Americans were told about these costs, that has material impacts, and that's going to be something that is going to have a lasting impact across our national parks and public land system. So, as we talk about these, as we also have learned, right, these no-bid contracts with massive cost overruns are also guaranteeing these contractors who appear to have at least casual relationships, if not direct relationships with the administration, are getting guaranteed a 20% profit. So you're not only sort of spending the money willy-nilly, but also, the people that are getting these no-bid contracts are seeing the windfall. I think a lot of us are familiar with the term grift, but it sure seems like, our park fees are being used for, what we've seen is this Trump administration, grift and lining the pockets of Trump's friends with, quite frankly, your entrance fees that are supposed to potentially be going back to parks and park administrative processes and how we decide these things. One thing I did was sort of, I love to do those sort of back of the napkin math and recall my old days in calculus. No, it's not even that complicated, but, sort of, again, Congressional Report had a recent analysis on sort of this money and sort of what we collect from recreation fees. And across our recreation fees, from fiscal year 2023, that total bucket was about $600 million. Now, then you'd sort of drop down into parks, and specifically for the national park system across, right? That was where recreation fees collected about nearly $500 million, 482 million, right? But again, that was sort of again across these recreation fees. But you take that sort of analysis and you sort of break it down and you sort of take this 20% number. So from fiscal year 2023, that's about $70 million. So according to the Washington Post analysis, unless we've had, and we know tourism has increased, unless we've sort of gotten these new fees installed that Burgum has proposed, and are really making a ton more money than we have in the past, right? Quite frankly, what they've already spent on these Trump vanity projects in DC, that means that discretionary 20% is essentially
Gone.
gone. There is
Yeah.
no money in the banana stand, as we like to say. So what that happens, and we're not even halfway through the year, right? So again, emergency situations. Do we have fires? Do we have other issues? A rock slide, a landslide that takes out a road, right? Where we've seen in areas that this happens. Is there going to be money to address those needs? And that's sort of some of the questions that are already being asked. And not the least of which was also reported by Notice today, that now they're doing a special review for any grant over $50,000. A lot of those grants go to our parks and the park allies and the park, people that support our parks and the functioning of our parks. And now, we're putting the thumb on the scale there. So, I'm encouraged, and again, but just looking at that math, it doesn't add up, and it's sort of reflective of a lot of the fuzzy math and unclear math that Burgum's already been doing across our public lands and parks.
So, going back to the legality question, how are they defending this, these no bid contracts and these sort of cost overruns and just the general diversion of funds to DC?
Well, I think that's the open question. While we know that this administration and Trump and Burgum are sort of masters of distraction and masters of the doublespeak, and we're seeing a lot of people trumpet the fact that we've spent all this money to make the reflecting pool reflect again, which when it was reflecting before. um, it's that's the open question, and that's for members of Congress to start being engaged in. And it's encouraging to see more members start to actually ask these critical questions that a lot of our groups and our watchdog groups have been asking. But our contention is sort of, as you look across sort of not only where the questions are about the accounting and the transparency of the use of fees and just the quick back of the napkin math that we've done to sort of look at where sort of, again, this extra 20% would be. Those are answers that we need answered, and the public are asking. And now I'm encouraged to see members of Congress are asking much more forcefully. But it seems to be we're kind of drifting outside the guidelines of the law, and Trump being sort of the Trump pool boy yes man, who is, when he gets told to do something, he's jumping, and it doesn't, rules, regulations, and laws be damned. He's going to do it, and at the expense
Dear leader
of
wants it.
other parks and public lands.
One thing I want to bring up is that the Trump administration, including Doug Burgum is included in that, actually asked to decrease the National Park Service budget for this coming year, 2027. What do you make of that when they're, spending so much on projects in DC, which of course we're not opposed to investments in national park sites in DC, but it is sort of glaring when they're also suggesting cutting the budget for the full park services, sort of maintenance and construction costs for next year.
Well, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul is is an old idiom that comes to mind, right? I mean, their park maintenance isn't just DC, right? And while DC is our capital and our nation's capital, and there were needs there. But yeah, I mean, there's $4 million in deferred maintenance in California, right? There's maybe that was billion, so I got to double check my numbers on there. I might be forgetting some decimal points, but that's sort of the point, right? And where we're at, that's where we're choosing. And as we always say, like, a budget by an administration is a declaration of their values. Americans across the nation, this is one of our most beloved entities. This is something that, again, as we continue to track, is one of the agencies that Americans have trust in, love. And if you're targeting that, if again, as your value statement of your budgets going forward, and again, to cut already after the reckless Doge cuts and the 24% reduction across NSP, and then you have institute another budget that shows that, yeah, it tells us a lot about this administration, Doug Burgum, and where they stand on our parks and public lands. And that's quite frankly reflective in what he's told us. He's told us directly, for those that love your outdoors, that love wildlife, that love our parks, we're financially illiterate. That's what Doug Burgum told us. And never mind the outdoor economy, never mind our natural and outdoor heritage and our values. We're actually illiterate, and we should just get in line and follow along with what they're doing to decimate our parks and public lands.
I want to talk about Freedom 250. So, back 10 years ago, Congress created an official group to celebrate America's 250th birthday party. They called it America 250, and that was up and going. That was the big official birthday party. It was bipartisan. There was leadership from both parties on the board. And then all of a sudden, last fall, we see this new group, Freedom 250, show up. We saw there was an order across the Interior Department telling everyone at Interior, Freedom 250 is it now. America 250 is effectively dead to this administration, is what it seems like. So what is behind this? Why did the president suddenly need some new group to sideline what Congress had been doing and funding for a decade?
That's a really good question. And but as we've uncovered in a lot of groups here, and you guys as well have worked, um, you know, folks are very well aware of the destruction of the east wing of the ballroom, right, and the east wing of the White House for Trump's ballroom. And we've already sort of seen in great reporting again by the Washington Post and others out there, um, those corporate sponsors behind the ballroom have received rewards. They've received, billions in contracts from the government. So when we sort of first uncovered this across our public lands groups and our parks groups, we said, "Whoa, this is weird, right?" Here's again, as we've all sort of knew going into this second Trump administration, that he was going to have this, sort of, again, once in a generational presidential opportunity to stand up there and do something that was nonpartisan and just celebrate America's 250th anniversary and not make it about himself. But that wasn't enough, right? And so, as we can tell, the directive went to Doug Burgum, and this falls right on Doug Burgum's lap to say the congressionally mandated National Parks Foundation, created in 1967 to support our national parks, is now going to be sidelined and used as for political purposes. And when even Brett Michaels can see through the noise and understand the political nature of what's become our 250th anniversary to uplift Trump and politicize it, yeah, it's sort of unheralded, and that has resulted in what we know, right? $1 million can get you access to the president, right? Look at these corporate sponsors who have direct issues with our government and our federal government, who are now sponsoring this politicization of Freedom 250. And again, what does that mean? It's a pattern in practice, right? You get kickbacks if you're willing to play, and that's where we're at. So I guess I'm making an open call to J.D. Vance, who's now supposedly heading up this Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Commission, to directly look into Freedom 250, because as we've all documented, and a lot of other groups have documented, and reporters have documented, this seems to be a core rot inside the D.C. swamp that's being directed by Doug Burgum.
So if you've created something that is too toxic for Bret Michaels, is it fair to say that Freedom 250 is in fact poison?
I knew you were coming with that one, Aaron, but you had to.
I'm required by law as a dad. I have to make that joke. Sorry.
Well, on that, yeah,
go
ahead.
No joke. I mean, again, what we've taken is essentially this opportunity for some unity across this country, and inserted poison into it, and inserted politics. And hey, like, maybe on the 4th of July, we can just celebrate being Americans in America and not have to have it be about, infused politics. I mean, that doesn't seem like that much to ask for Americans.
Totally. Well, on that note, and I think we sort of have been getting at this, Freedom 250 and Trump and Burgum had been planning this big concert at the National Mall, I believe. And they were going to have Martina McBride, Milli Vanilli, some other people that I'd heard of but don't listen to. And they've pretty much all pulled out of this concert because it's too political. And now we're hearing that Trump is thinking of replacing it with a MAGA rally. What have you heard? What's the status of sort of the July 4th America 250 Freedom 250 celebration right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, never, give Trump an opportunity to make something about himself, and he will do it. And Burgum will clap him and be his pool boy the whole along the line. So yeah, now we've sort of again gone to, some, for Aaron and I to age ourselves, some historic classical American bands that we knew from our youth, to essentially, Trump, and apparently he's claiming he's more popular than Elvis, and he doesn't even need a guitar, and this is going to be a great celebration to him, with some other sideshows and whoever he can get to show up to celebrate this. But at what cost? And that's sort of the other thing that I think a lot of people sort of, again, there's a lot of opportunities to be distracted, and again, as I mentioned before, this administration, right? But at the fundamental core of this is the fact that this administration, at much cost to taxpayers and public funds, went forward and created a dual sort of effort to politicize America's anniversary. Yeah. And at the Great American Fair that they're calling it now, again, if the headliner's Trump, I don't know, what does it look like, with somebody with a popularity rating that's lower than a snake's belly. I'm not sure a bunch of people turn out in DC to come see Donald Trump take a nap without a guitar.
It's going to be the 2016 inauguration crowd argument all over again.
I'm going to go find out where CNC Music Factory is actually playing this year now that they're not on the mall. All right, so back in February, the head of the National Park Foundation was testifying about Freedom 250, which is, as we noted, a part of the National Park Foundation, which I think is an interesting note because the Park Foundation was chartered by Congress, and has some special powers under the law to accept donations that would otherwise be restricted for Interior to accept. And the CEO, Jeff Reinbold, said they will continue to grant anonymity to donors who request it, and that they're not going to share donor contracts on Freedom 250 with Congress. So when you hear that, anonymous donors, no public contracts, and we've seen this pitch deck where they say, well, sponsor this for $1 million and you get a photo with the president. connect the dots here for us.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it takes a watchdog or a very, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to say that if we don't have sunshine, we're going to have a lot of shenanigans, as we say. And sunshine is the best disinfectant. Doug Burgum has been specifically called to task on those questions as well. And they're refusing to provide transparency. And it's sort of interesting to hear not only a congressionally chartered sort of foundation to support our parks and the CEO sort of follow that company line. Now, as we all know, nonprofits are granted certain abilities under their donations to do that. But we know that once this sort of kicked off, there was immediately calls, and again, foreign ambassadors making calls for foreign donations to this effort. Um, you know, Solicitations to business interests and corporate interests, whether they were American or not. I think transparency is as American as apple pie. And when we don't have transparency, this is where we get the mnemonic, the DC swamp. And the irony of Trump beautifying the DC swamp with all this money and these corporate donations, but the rot behind the sheen is getting deeper than it's ever been. And as I like to say, you can, put lipstick on a pig, much like Trump's spray tan, but eventually it wears off and you're just left with a pig.
Yeah. And it does feel like the wheels are coming off. And I guess, we've got the midterms coming up. So we'll see how things are going. But I want to zoom out really quick and ask you about your past work with the Western Values Project. You covered corruption by then Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke and then David Bernhardt before him during the first Trump term. How does this administration compare in this Interior Department and Interior Secretary?
I mean, I think we have sort of already said, the reprisal of sort of the, Make America Great was Ronald Reagan. This is Trump rebranding it and Trumpifying it. But, for us that track our public lands, James Watt always comes up because James Watt was historically one of the worst interior secretaries in American history. I know we had an interior secretary with the Teapot Dome scandal too. That gets
Albert
a little
Fall.
bit yeah, further back into our historical archives. But for most people, they remember essentially Trump 1.0 and Ryan Zinke and his efforts to revoke the most amount of public lands in history and direct attacks on the Antiquities Act. And then David Bernhardt, the revolving door lobbyist, who was essentially appointed to do special interest bidding. But this has turbocharged it. Doug Burgum with his, business sheen and coming in and saying, I'm running it like a business. And sort of, we always sort of joke with all the noise and one battle after the other, but it's like, this is quite frankly, unprecedented attacks and on the foundations of our public lands and parks. And, that too is a legacy in what we're going to see from redirecting these funds that now are going to kneecap parks maintenance backlogs and funding for years, right? And to go ask for money now too, when the Trump administration has run up the national debt to now over $39 trillion, right? This is unprecedented. There isn't accountability. There are no sideboards. There is no transparency. And it no longer appears to be ethics requirements at the Department of Interior under Doug Burgum. And even worse, right, when we actually had an inspector general, right, somebody there at an agency that is there to make sure that they aren't doing illegal stuff, that position has been vacant since Doug Burgum's been there. So again, when we have these questions about these severely conflicted cronies, when we have questions about, some of these vanity projects and illegal acts by the administration, violations of the National Parks Organic Act, who do you go to? Are you going to go to Trump's DOJ? Heck, they won't even release the Epstein files. So when we look at this and what's going on across this administration, and quite frankly, a Congress that is controlled by the same party, but has largely laid down on their job and has failed to do the work. This is where Doug Burgum and his, cadre of cronies and anti-public lands folks that they put into key positions and have granted them, ethics waivers. This is where the rubber's hitting the road, folks, and there's very few watchdogs on the beat at the federal level, and it makes it that much more difficult for us as good government groups, as groups that are concerned about our public lands, parks, and wildlife, to actually have any ability to provide some accountability for the American people. And that's sort of, again, where I think when we sort of look back at history and sort of the track record of just this short sort of year and a half of Doug Burgum as their Interior Secretary, which includes now the likes of Karen Bud Fallon, Deputy Kate McGregor, now one of the most corrupt members of Congress, Stephen Pierce, folks like Kevin Lilly. Who is Kevin Lilly? We still don't know. And, special appointed positions in which, yeah, they're kind of, outside of groups putting out and pushing this transparency effort, yeah, they're getting away with quite frankly, yeah, I would say is for somebody that values our parks and public lands, criminal activity without a lot of accountability in this era.
Yeah, in terms of whether it's criminal or not, I think that's an interesting question that a functional or independent DOJ would be looking into by this point, and until there is either an independent DOJ or Congress with subpoena power, we probably won't know. I do think it's interesting thinking about Ryan Zinke and David Bernhardt during the first Trump term. Zinke was, at the end of the day, mostly a buffoon, right? I mean, it was small.
Well, to
quote
David Bernhardt, he's a buffoon, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was the small ball corruption of. Yeah, I mean, he was meeting with Halliburton trying to get his brew pub up and running in Whitefish, as opposed to Bernhardt, who is, by all accounts, very smart, very savvy, and was there to do a job for his former clients, and at the end of the day didn't succeed terribly well. He failed in the courts and lost a lot. But when Burgum was coming in, I was certainly expecting him to be closer to the Bernhardt vein of a smarter, savvier operator coming out of the tech world. And I think instead what we got with Burgum was the worst of both worlds. And you look at these appearances that Burgum is making, where he's just so obsequious, sucking up to President Trump in a really shameless way on CNN and in cabinet meetings. I don't think even Zinke was ever that embarrassingly deferential to Trump the way Burgum is. And if there's anything that has surprised me from this first year and a half, it's that there does not appear to be any sort of independent streak or attempt to give himself a little distance. He's just all in on Dear Leader. And I guess that's his legacy now. It's where he's chosen to put himself.
Well, and that's a good point, too. And I think, Aaron, that brings us back to sort of what we knew that, again, in David Bernhardt's sort of stead of replacing Ryan Zinke after 2 years, David Bernhardt wanted to do things that were actually complied with the law so that they weren't be legally challenged. So at least he put forward,
tried to make them stick. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that maybe wasn't for us who want our public lands and parks to be there for the next generation, wasn't in our interest. But, that's sort of, again, under this new sort of 2.0 effort, and Doug Burgum being that sort of yes man to the president, you know, rules, guidelines, laws be damned, right? And, that's sort of, again, some of the legacy I think that's come out of potentially some of the David Bernhardt thing is the direct undermining of the ethics office, right? I mean, that's one thing we can point to that has ushered in essentially this sort of unchecked exploitation of our parks and public lands by Doug Burgum. Because if there were actually some of those backstops at the Interior Department, and knowing that leaving the independent investigators sort of vacant, and also having a DOJ that's completely compromised, right? That has sort of greased the wheels. Again, they sat back, they waited for 4 years, they wrote their Project 2025. And if anybody wants to sort of question where we're going with, the public land sell-off and the park privatization efforts, it's right there in Project 2025, folks. And they're following the blueprint. So, and when they got that opportunity, and they jumped, right? And Doug Burgum has gone in with that sort of, not only sort of that sheen, and again, quite frankly, being that yes man and pool boy for Donald Trump, but he's also put in the henchmen and the people that are going forward, regardless of those things, like Karen Bud Fallon, and doing things just to enrich herself and doing the bidding of the special interests, with no accountability, because there isn't any. And again, the idea that, some of these folks, even in Trump 1.0, couldn't be in these positions and couldn't meet the ethical requirements. And now, not only are they there, but they've also been given a basically free pass to do whatever, while Doug Burgum, does his media appearances and jet sets around.
Plays
Yeah,
pool boy.
that is a legacy that is going to be last generations negatively.
So, as we've discussed, a lot of Doug Burgum and President Trump's attention seems to be going towards getting DC ready for this Freedom 250 celebration, and just generally figuring out how to enrich themselves and grift off of the July 4th, America's 250th birthday. What happens next? What do you think when, on July 5th, when the fireworks are over? What do you think Burgum and Trump will turn their attention to? Will they leave the Park Service alone and sort of let it go back to being the Park Service, or do you think that they'll find a way to continue sort of grifting
Yeah.
off of this?
Well, from what we know, that's public, the little publicly available about Freedom 250, and you can't forget, the UFC fight on the South Lawn here, which also we've already had sort of fainted. Trump usually tells us what he's going to do in passing, and maybe keeping up that cage for forever, I guess. I don't know. To me, it looks
Yeah.
pretty gaudy on the South Lawn, but so there's already sort of, again, it doesn't appear to us that sort of the Freedom 250 mnemonic necessarily is going away.
Mm.
There is repeated sort of scheduled events sort of even after the fireworks and the celebration, the anniversary. But I encourage, again, like Congress and Americans, you need to follow the money. And, you know, when we sort of maybe wake up from this and sort of the accounting and that we've already sort of known and the money spent, right? There isn't going to be that sort of extra 20% budget from entrance fees for the rest of our, parks. What about the corporate donors who were all in on this, like Palantir? What sort of sweetheart deal did they get? U.S. Airlines, right? Um, right now, every American should be demanding that transparency and accountability. Um, and I like to say, yes, it starts with your congressional members, but also after we celebrate the July 4th, there's going to be us picking up those pieces, and, we need to be asking those questions and what those ramifications are. And that doesn't just mean your members of Congress, because we know, right, how our parks, like you guys in Colorado and me in Montana, are so impactful for our local economies, our local gateway communities in our state. So, accountability doesn't just stop at Congress. It means your state elected officials. What are your governors doing? What are your local county commissioners doing? What are your local city officials doing? Because these are their businesses. These are our neighbors that rely on sort of, again, the opportunity we have to go visit these parks. But, their seasonal tourism dollars make and break communities. And right now, when that's going on, we still have unqualified cronies up for nomination, like Kevin Lilly. He's pending confirmation. Ask your senator. Why should we have a wealthy Texas investment manager with no experience about wildlife or our parks in these positions, right? And I remind folks, when we talk about sort of where we're directing our priorities and our money, um, America's outdoor economy is greater than all extracted development. That's mining, oil, and gas combined. Our economic impact of our outdoor economy is greater than extractive industries. So, that's what we're sacrificing here. And sort of, again, while we have the rush, and I'm asking, again, I'm going to be celebrating America's 250 just like everyone else. Um, but, that's what we're sort of sacrificing here. And again, where the pieces we need to be looking sort of after we get through the celebration and say, all right, you had fun, but you did it on our dime. And, we need some accountability here.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, looking forward, what is giving you hope for our parks? I mean, I know there's a lot of hope for flipped Congress coming out of the midterms, and maybe we can have our members of Congress start asking questions about who got what for their anonymous donations to Freedom 250. What are you looking forward to, and sort of what are you planning, I guess?
Yeah, I think one I would say too is like there's no prohibition on a Republican controlled Congress from doing subpoenas either. So they're as we know from polling across the country about, again, one of America's greatest ideas in our national parks and how much we value them. I would encourage members of Congress to start listening to their constituents now and start taking action now. But outside of that, yeah, I mean, again, we need to have some accountability on this. And, don't be distracted too by some of the noise and some of the flashy things, because right now, again, we're going to have, parks and public lands as a decision point come this November. But what gives me hope is one, the employees, right? What I sort of have seen come out of this, in spite of sort of the direct attacks against employees and the retribution they've faced because of this administration through Doge, Burgum, and Trump, they're still standing up. They're still saying and working to do the right thing. I mean, I can't continue to repeat, any smart business person, when you look at the numbers about the economic impact our national parks, public lands, and outdoors has on our economy, and the employees who do this and dedicate their lives to protecting and making sure that those resources are here now and for future generations, I mean, that's a bang for our dollar that you can't get anywhere else. Like it's quite frankly an ROI that, and maybe that's why, all these other private sector people are salivating, right? Because they're saying like, look at how well this goes. Well, but that's in the interest of the people. And again, it's not in the interest of profit, right? And we allow a lot of other businesses to take advantage of that and use that to create jobs, to be small business owners, to even, quite frankly, like the Delaware Norse, make revenue off our national parks. But again, when we give away those assets, we never get them back. But for us to say, and again, those employees out there, those park employees, those public land managers, they're actually the boots on the ground, that aren't the political appointees, the administrators, the HR people, are doing still all the work that needs to be done with a shoestring budget and getting attacked relentlessly by this administration and Doug Burgum. And it's quite frankly disgusting, but that does warm my heart, and that gives me hope. And that gives me hope, and also that the people are waking up to this. Again, I was very encouraged to see essentially a bipartisan effort in the Senate again today. 11 senators sending a letter and asking direct questions to Doug Burgum. I encourage Where is the Stewardship Caucus? Where's the Public Lands Caucus? Where is the Western Caucus? All these other Republican members in these states where there's being severe impacts of these actions, step up, join your colleagues. This is a great opportunity. What's better than the Americans' 250th anniversary to join in some bipartisan accountability effort to root out some fraud, waste, and abuse, by the executive branch, right? That sounds like a celebration to me. I mean, that would be fireworks for me. So, and then that means, again, people, right? And people across the West, the people across America are waking up to this, and they're seeing what their intent is, and they're learning about it, and they're cutting through, quite frankly, the noise and the chatter. Just like we said, it's really hard to differentiate, America 250 from Freedom 250. But I believe in the American public. I believe that they can see and they can smell a rat when they see one. And right now they're smelling it with Freedom 250.
If young MC can tell the difference, so can you. Jayson O'Neill with the Save Our Parks campaign and the owner of the best podcast mustache this side of Mark Maron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Aaron. Keep up the great work. I so appreciate all you guys are doing to continue to fight for our parks and public lands and wildlife.
Here's a little good news to end the episode. A federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to reinstall exhibits and signs that were removed as part of the administration's efforts to rewrite American history in our national parks. The order is the result of a lawsuit filed by a coalition of conservation groups that challenged an Interior Department policy implementing Trump's, quote, restoring truth and sanity to American history order in national parks and historic sites. The policy directs park staff to remove any signs that, quote, disparage Americans. In practice, the administration removed signs that mention topics like slavery, indigenous history, and climate change. As part of Trump's censorship effort, QR codes were put up in national parks across the country, directing visitors to report any signs that were, quote, negative about past or living Americans. We actually analyzed those comments and found that 99.9% of them defended historical accuracy, expressed support for the National Park Service, or just simply disparaged Trump's order or the QR code signs themselves. And less than 1% actually flagged a sign for removal.
Well, that is it for today, folks. If you would like to snitch on Doug Burgum, you can email us, podcast@westernpriorities.org. Also, check out all of the great work that Kate and Sterling are doing over on our Instagram account. We will drop a link to Jayson O'Neill's Save Our Parks website in the show notes if you want to go deeper on any of this stuff, and stay up to date on how Donald Trump and Doug Burgum are unfortunately still abusing the National Park Service. And we will also, of course, put in a link to that QR code analysis that Kate mentioned.
Thanks to Jayson for his time today, and thank you for listening to The Landscape.